Going live.
I brought.
Do you need water? I have like 2 ounces left.
No, I'm good actually.
What?
I brought that so I can hopefully read the chat while we do all this.
That would make it so I don't have to use my laptop.
Yeah, we got kind of a messy desk here.
All right. Everybody, we're going to do some audio tests for those that are already tuned in.
Yeah, I'm sure people are hopefully already telling us whether or not it's good.
There's probably a couple out there. All right, hang on 1 second.
But other than that, welcome guys. This is our weekly live stream, our Sunday live stream where we pick some topics, talk about Genus beer news, and shoot the breeze. Let us know if the audio and the video is looking good.
Also, why do you always give me like the mic with the giant pop filter on it so I can't
You want to switch spots?
No, I'm good. I'm just going to...
That's the better mic. I like that. And you're supposed to use the pop filter, so, you know.
Yeah, so it just blocks my entire face is all.
See, we're very bright today. That's what we're saying.
All right.
So I told you we should turn that down.
Well, let me pull up the stream on my computer so I can see all of your wonderful comments. Once again, for those of you just tuning in, let us know how we are sounding.
Is that less intense? A good balance of intense? Yeah, that's probably better.
Brewing. We got some fun stuff to go over today.
We're going for that dramatic effect. So I kept the background nice and dark, and we got just one light hitting us. Should be a little bit shadowy. Let us know if it's like super dope.
Why is my computer not working?
Coffee check, mic check, bottle of urine check. Yeah, we've got it all.
Oh, it's got electrolytes. Don't worry about it.
Electrolyte urine. Somebody already commented, nice. I've been planning to brew a stout with Hornadal Kveik. And that's super cool.
Super. Hey, there we go. There's our live stream. Found it.
Yeah.
I kept the background nice and dark, and we got just one
maybe not play the live stream like that.
I was going to say that was really confusing. We can see ourselves. That's weird.
Yeah. We probably could have just used the one that's right in front of us.
Oh, you already have one? Oh.
The one that, yeah, it's full screen, you know. Can easily fit in the middle of the screen.
That's all right.
Remember
We got more clutter on here now, so.
Yeah, it looks super great. You know, overall, we don't look too bad. You might want to lower your mic a little bit so your face isn't covered better than that.
You told me to get the mic close.
It's got to be close, but it can be close and like right under your face instead of close and like covering most of your face.
It's like chin.
Maybe you just have a
mic.
small face. I don't know.
Chin mic like this.
Yeah, that should work.
I don't think I have a large face. Oh, all right. Anyway, let's just get started.
Let's go ahead and get started. We'll start, as always, with some Genus updates. As you all are very well aware, there's a lot of things going on with businesses being shut down and the federal government offering loans and aid. And so a lot of this last week has been focused not only here but at my other business downtown on trying to figure out the rigmarole that is all those federal loan applications.
Basically, Peter's been working really, really hard and stressing the living daylights out of himself and therefore stressing me by like side default, just watching him do all that. And mostly because he's applied for loans and then reapplied for those loans and then like reapplied for them again because
they keep changing the information on me. And I'm not like by trade a lawyer or an accountant who's designed to look through these. So a lot of times I just I ask my mama, hey, don't spill tea all over your stuff.
That was
say,
really
hey,
close.
do you know anything that I don't? And then sometimes she's actually, part of her job is looking through all this for the company that she works for now, which is actually really handy. But at the same time, keeping up with all this information has been really, really fun.
Also, on a more up note, we have actually kegged up the first 2 batches of Will It beer, that being I don't even remember what it was that I made. That was a while ago.
Yeah,
now.
with applesauce and raisins.
Yeah. Well, I guess they're not kegged, but they're on tap.
They're on tap.
They were kegged up a while ago.
What punchline? The moral of this story is that when we first uploaded these Will It beer series, these 2 beers were freshly kegged and not conditioned at all. And so it was kind of, we were glad that we were able to get those videos out on that timeline. But now that they're conditioned, they've become a much more good representation of what they should be. And both of them are surprisingly good.
There you go. So
we'll have to do a blind tasting side by side on that in the near future so that you can get the final verdict that says that
it turns out we might be able to actually make beer around here. Who would have known, right?
Speaking of Will It beers, our Will It beer series number 3 beers got kegged as well. The chili beers that you might have seen a little teaser for if you follow our Instagram.
Yeah, at Genus Instagram. What is it?
Instagram.com/Genus Brewing.
Instagram.com/Genus Brewing. Yeah, follow us on there. Both of them, we got a really interesting chili addition in that Peter claims ruined his beer, but we'll see from there. You know, we had to get it in there somehow. It was the chili sauce. That's what did it, really.
Yeah, the chili sauce is going to be the interesting ingredient. Both beers tasted great going into kegs, and then we had to add that green chili enchilada sauce. So coming out of kegs, we'll see.
So, and then what's our last bit there?
Let's see. We started building shippable recipe kits.
Oh yeah, that's kind of a big deal.
Yeah.
We are for those of you, if you actually are listening, we already had a couple orders. We just put that live on Friday.
Yeah, and a couple people have already done it. We're still working through the best overall shipping costs, modification things that's going on. So
we might have thought that $8 of shipping to ship throughout the continental United States was going to be enough, and turns out that might not be the case right now.
We expected a little bit of a loss, but now, I mean, there's a lot of ways that we're trying to get the overall cost down while keeping the production and the quality, the aesthetic of the box looking good.
I know, right? We got that. We got this awesome graphic to put on boxes. In fact, I made like another one for Stouts that I'd like to throw on there. But at the same time, we don't want to spend like, what would that end up being, like $40 between the box graphics and shipping it to places. So we're kind of torn right now because we want it to look really nice for everyone that wants to buy one, but at the same time,
it looks like the best box shipping,
double the price of the kit.
the best shipping box right out there right now is those one size fits all boxes, which they don't look as good, but we can always figure out a way to brand the inside of the box too. We'll figure that out, but that's those two will be shipping out tomorrow, the first two orders, so that's going to be super fun. So we can hopefully, if you're watching, give us some feedback and let us know, first of all, how the brew day goes, how the box looked when it arrived, all that jazz, because we want to make sure that we're doing the best by our customers as possible. Yep. And it's always harder when they're not local, because then we don't have that face-to-face where we can make sure that everything goes well. But there are a couple things that we're doing in the kits to make sure that you have the best overall possibility of making good beer. For example, we're actually including a little bit of starter.
Yep, starter, nutrient with that starter.
Yep.
What else? I think I threw in a couple stickers in the one.
Yeah, it's a couple stickers.
Just trying to make things make things work well. So.
And that first beer is a coffee beer, and we went ahead and got like super fresh, locally roasted coffee. So it's gonna taste fantastic.
Yep. For those of you tuned in, that is available on our website. It should just be Genus Brewing.
.com.
Yeah, I was like, I think it's a simple one. We'll post a hyperlink down in the description after we get this video up and running.
Heck yeah.
So if you want to support us, definitely buy those recipe kits. Might even, depending on how this week goes, throw up another one or two if we start getting consistent orders for them.
Yeah, it'd be nice to, and then the more we can ship out, the more we might be able to work with a shipper to hopefully get that shipping price down. So it's definitely still in the R&D, the beta phase, but it should be a really fun thing to get out.
Yep, trying to get the freshest ingredients out to you, which I don't think any other shipping brewery supply place does. I think that everything just sits in a warehouse for them. So
we care.
Yeah, we care.
We want to do the best by the people that buy from us.
Grains are milled like the day they get shipped out.
Yep.
We make sure we got the freshest hops. With that said, it's not always that easy when you got like noble hops to work with, but
subject to availability.
Subject to availability.
But we don't have a one-size-fits-all recipe. It's not like this is always going to be the recipe. If something changes and a new hop varietal, for example, is going to be fresher than the previous recipe, we'll switch up the recipe to make sure that you're getting the freshest ingredients, because that's more important than actually what's in it.
Speaking of hops and lack thereof, let's go to our ready for it.
Almost. Got to clear up. Ready? All right, I'm ready.
Beer of the week.
Bump.
Beer of the week. Woo. Yeah. All right. Our beer of the week style is a tropical stout this week, and
tropical stout's a fun one. It's one that we haven't had a lot of commercial examples available to us.
Honestly, I've never brewed one, so
I've had probably, I wouldn't say a lot, but I've had probably two or three that other people have brewed that I thought were fantastic, but I haven't really delved into the style. And I've had one commercial example. I believe it was Sierra Nevada that released one last year. Comes with like a nice blue label. Looks super delicious. Tastes super delicious.
Yeah. I take that back. I think I did brew one. That's what we were talking about yesterday when we were doing our research on the style. I think we did brew one about a year and a half, 2 years ago when we were actually trying to do more or less a Baltic porter.
Yeah.
And fermented that super warm. Had these like crazy fruity notes to it. And so I guess that probably would have fallen more or less in that range of a tropical stout.
But let's go on to hops. First of all, before we get into the hop of the week, we should talk about the fact that tropical stouts are relatively low in hop character. So, you're not supposed to be getting a lot of flavor or aroma from the hops. But just in case you accidentally do, you should probably pick a hop that's going to blend in well with the yeast that you choose. So we chose Sabro.
Sabro is a fairly new hop to the market and really has become known for its big, coconut. There we go. That was the word I was going for.
Sabro's got some really big coconuts,
But it is also mistaken a lot for being a fantastic IPA hop, and I think that comes down to a lot of the fact that this hop isn't as pungent as a lot of other IPA hops that you might be using.
Yeah, and that's why it's a good choice for a tropical stout, because on top of not wanting a lot of flavor or aroma from your hops in a tropical stout, you also don't want an overly assertive amount of hop aggression. So things that are going to be overly pungent, like Columbus, are going to be out. Things that are going to be over Cobidey, like Chinook or Centennial, those are going to be out. Sabro overall is just a relatively soft hop, and if you happen to get some of that coconut flavor lingering into the beer, it's going to blend pretty dang well.
Yeah, so fun fact, we actually went into that research thinking that, tropical stout, it's got to be like a hop-forward stout or something like that, like with big New World fruity hops. And yes, while Sabro is going to fall into that fruity category, you're actually not going to load it up. Specifically in the style guidelines, it says this is not a hop-forward beer. The aroma has little to no hop aromatics to it. And really that aroma is going to be coming from the yeast itself. So I would say on a hop schedule, you're not really going to throw more than maybe an ounce of hops at this beer.
You are aiming for
a
that 40,
5-gallon batch.
So that, if you are aiming for that 45 to 50 IBUs, and so you should be able to get there with an ounce at 60 minutes, where you can maybe, if you want to bolster a little bit of that middle ground, do like an ounce and a half at, what was that? Jiminy Crispix.
That was your phone.
That was not my phone. That's not my phone sound.
Okay.
Maybe an ounce and a half at 30 to 45 minutes if you want to maybe touch onto a little bit of flavor that you don't need. Let's go into
the mic.
Huh?
Never mind. Keep going.
You're just giving like big slurpy noises to the mic?
Yeah, pretty much.
Nice.
So let's go on to
slurp probably sounded super crispy though.
The malt of the week, which we actually chose a little bit different one. Typically, you might think of like, just regular old carafa or something like that. Like a carafa.
Instead our malt of the week is 2-row.
No, it's
just
not
kidding.
2-row. It is chocolate wheat malt, which is one that provides absolutely delicious flavors, and yet is not used enough, in my opinion.
Yeah, I actually really enjoy chocolate wheat as a middle, and a lot of times I'll substitute, in recipes, I'll substitute chocolate malt for chocolate wheat. Unfortunately, the main vendor that we order from every week does not have chocolate wheat, and so when we're out of it for a solid month plus at a time, as we are currently.
Are we actually?
Yeah, we're out of chocolate wheat right now.
I thought we had some.
No, we had the rest of the bag got sold too. Or no, maybe we used it in a 7-barrel.
Dang it!
In a big batch.
You guys are killing me.
But chocolate wheat's really nice because the higher protein content going into the overall whatever they do to make chocolate, it seems to have a little bit more maturity, but that same nice chocolate intensity.
So
without being powdery like barley chocolate malt.
Yeah, so some quick specs. This is a really, really dark malt too, which actually makes it great for adding color without excessive roastiness to a style like a tropical stout. Tropical stouts should not have roastiness like a typical stout would, where it might be roasty, might be burnt, might have almost a smoky characteristic. But the Lovabond is actually going to be right around that 400 L mark, so really, really dark malt. And then on top of that, we don't have the husk associated with some of the barley-based roasted malts that
going to be debittered.
Yep. So you're not going to get that tannic bite, and that's another kind of big factor in the style. This style should really, really be actually on the sweet side. It should be full, it should be sweet, and it shouldn't be overly roasty, shouldn't be overly bitter at the same time. You good? You're just going to leave it at that?
Yeah, shouldn't be over roasted at the same time.
Yeah. As for amount, for 5-gallon batches, you're going to be wanting to shoot for somewhere in that half a pound range. You might want to add
push it a little bit if you got some other stuff going on.
Yeah. Somewhere in about that half a pound. You could probably go up to 12 ounces. I would definitely cap it at like a pound. I wouldn't go over a pound.
And you are going to want to blend it with some other dark roasty malts. And so this tropical stout can get, it can be on that darker side, 30 to 40 SRM. But going ahead and maybe going for between that and some other darker malts, going a pound and a quarter, somewhere in that 10 to 15% range. I mean, if you really want to get on the darker end, can be appropriate.
Yes. So some of the other flavor profiles of tropical stouts are going to be that sweetness, a sort of I forget what the term is. It's like vinous quality to it.
Yeah, that means wine like.
Which you can actually get from some pretty some heavily roasted or like double roasted crystal. I think would be another good malt, or something in that crystal malt range that's going to be above that 100 Lovabond. So C120, C150. What do we got? We got some special aroma would probably work really good. Is that the malt I'm thinking of?
Special X or Cara Aroma?
Cara Aroma, that's it. Yeah, Cara Aroma.
Anyways.
The one that's like 120 from, I think that's the best malt.
That's the Special X.
Yep.
Yeah.
So on to the yeast, which is also a really interesting part of this beer style. So this is a... what is it? Basically, it's a
typically fermented with a lager yeast, actually.
Yeah. So lager yeast fermented hot, though.
So you push some fruity notes off of your lager yeast, which means you don't want to choose a lager yeast that's going to be super neutral no matter what. You want to choose a lager yeast that's going to be, nice and fruity when you ferment it a little bit warm.
Yep. So your 3470 Bohemian Lager probably won't be the right choice. This is like one of the rare occasions I actually wouldn't use this yeast, considering it's one of my favorite strains. And instead, I think the yeast that would really fit this, which I have fermented hot, and it does tend to get really, really nice and fruity, almost throwing these like really raisiny notes, honestly. And that is the from Y Yeast. It is the 2633. I think that's right.
Yeah, fun story about that. One of our first videos that we did, I want to say it was like our third video or fourth video, was one where you fermented with the Oktoberfest blend. I think it might have been one that we did. With a local local Pilsner.
Sounds about right.
Yeah, with Link malts, and that one tasted fantastic with 2633. The Oktoberfest blend fermented a little bit warm too.
So that would be a fantastic strain. Definitely throws the fruitiness when fermented and at, say, 70 degrees, 75 degrees even. I wouldn't be afraid to really push that if you do have a warmish spot. With that said, any kind of room temperature should work just fine to get that character that you're wanting to. It's going to push through, like I said, the raisin qualities, any kind of plum qualities, which are actually going to make and round out this beer style.
Now, what you're really aiming for is also with the warmer temperatures, you're aiming for something that's going to be pushing forward some alcohol flavors too, because a little bit of that alcohol note actually is appropriate for this style, which is kind of surprising because the style actually tops out at 8%. And being 8%, a lot of 8% beers don't necessarily push forward that kind of alcohol bite, but it is appropriate in the tropical style. To sum up a tropical stout, basically it's supposed to be a nice stout that is surprisingly refreshing in a warmer climate, which is why you get the name tropical.
Almost a hybrid between a Schwarzbier and a Baltic Porter is the way I look at it. One other thing, though, to note, I think we almost forgot about that, is that having other adjuncts, especially sugar adjuncts, so the final gravities can be pretty low on this beer style. So having some sugar adjuncts, things like some brown sugar, turbinado, or just regular old cane sugar, can actually dry this beer out. And like Peter said, by definition, it's supposed to be refreshing. It's supposed to be light. So just overall lowering that final gravity, not having quite as thick of a beer compared to something like a Baltic Porter, is really, really what you're shooting for. So don't be afraid to throw, I don't know, what would you shoot for? Maybe
like 10% simple sugars,
like
something
10%,
like that.
Yeah, 10%.
You're aiming for right around that, probably pound and a half at the high end. But this beer can go down to 10-10. That finishes relatively dry for a beer that can be up to 8%. So
yep. So don't be afraid to throw a little bit of kind of simple sugars at it, and or some more complex sugars. I actually really like on these darker beers, either using like a dark brown sugar, or even a little bit of molasses doesn't hurt anything.
Molasses can get super aggressive though, so make sure you're not like throwing a bunch
Yeah,
of
just a little bit of molasses. So, all right. Well, that sums up tropical stouts. Hopefully, we will be brewing one as the weather warms up, which is not the case today. It actually snowed this morning here. Hashtag April does not like us.
Yeah.
Where's my warm weather? It's supposed to be like 65 degrees now. What are you looking for? Stop being boring. All right.
There's a reason I typed that.
Gotcha. Okay.
I just felt like I started zoning out during that last part because it was like, man, this is drilling on. Anyways.
On to our topics of the week.
Okay, I'm confused by what you did there. Did you try to do, is this still happening or is that not still happening?
No, we can talk about open fermentation.
Okay.
That's all right. We can talk about it.
That's all, okay, so you're planning on not talking about it, but we are talking about it.
Yeah, we can talk about it.
Okay. Open fermentation. So open fermentation is basically a style of fermentation where you don't, it's the exact opposite of a closed system. And the reason that open fermentation came to mind is because open fermentation can actually lend some nice, pleasant, fruity notes. If we're aiming for something like a tropical stout where, you want to push the fruity notes of those lagers, open fermentation might be your key.
There you go. And this, when we say open fermentation, we don't necessarily mean just putting your beer in a bucket and leaving the lid off. You do want some oxygen in there, but you have to be very specific on where you're placing that. Obviously a place like here where we're milling grains constantly and we have grain dust floating around, you're just asking for contamination in your beer.
And we ferment it with a lot of Kveik strains.
Yeah, so typically an open fermentation means that you're allowing some kind of oxygen to hit the krausen of that beer and hit the surface and allow a true top cropping yeast, something like a Bavarian wheat strain, to really, really take advantage of that extra amount of oxygen hitting the krausen.
What I've always done with open fermentation on the smaller scale, where I know I don't have a perfectly sanitized room, is I've taken some sort of vessel that I can, throw aluminum foil over or put a lid loosely on, and I'll let it go for a handful of days until that krausen starts to drop. And that's when I'll either seal it off or I'll transfer it at that point, because you really don't want oxygen getting in late stage fermentation, and you really want to make sure that you're keeping that situation as free of any bacteria that can get in there as possible. That said, if you do proper open fermentation with good top cropping yeast, you can get a really nice flavor, and that krausen can actually help protect your beer from other baddies, because it's it's creating an environment where it wants to live and not other stuff.
Yeah, so start with some foil. Honestly, even if you had got like some nice clean cheesecloth or something that you can drape over that's not going to seal it up completely, but at the same time keep anything from falling down out of the air, then that's the best way to do it. After about usually 3-ish days, depending on your pitch rate and temperature, that's when you probably want to pull that off and actually put a lid on the fermenter and seal that sucker off, just so that you don't get any kind of suck back from temperature variations or anything like that, because usually by then your fermentation's starting to die off. You've kind of peaked out and we're finishing up.
There's a lot of beers that I've actually kind of forced myself to finish early or get into package early. Doing a pseudo spund early, actually, strangely enough. But because it was, I didn't have an environment where it was necessarily appropriate, and I had our original 20+ gallon fermenter actually did not seal properly, which is why I started doing a lot of open fermentations.
Yeah, that little what was that? That was just like a milk thing.
Yeah, it was. I mean, if you really cranked it down, you can get it to seal, but at the same time, it was so much easier to just kind of do an open fermentation and transfer off early. It worked really well. We should add that on bigger scales, a lot of times open fermentation is a lot more appropriate because you're working with basically an environment that you control. And so if you're throwing your own yeast at that place, then your yeast is going to be the thing that dominates the entire situation. And there's a lot of more advanced techniques that can go in with like continuous fermentation and cropping and all that.
Yeah, not to mention the overall size of the vessel playing a big role in just a sheer amount of CO2 that's being thrown off. Generally on a commercial side, you're going to have these deeper vessels, and so that sort of blanket of CO2 that your yeast is actually producing is going to be just streaming off of that, where on a small scale at home where you might only have a vessel that's a foot deep, you're not going to have that, which is why we kind of recommend putting some kind of protective layer over the top.
Yeah. Or you can just, get a really, really big fermenter that takes up your entire room and then ferment in it constantly.
Yeah. So overall, though, open fermentations for things like wheat beers can actually really push forward those banana notes. So if you actually want to make a true banana vice, that is a really, really great technique. But also for, more modern beers, things like American IPAs, even with fairly neutral ale strains, that for some reason can tend to push those fruity notes from the hops as well. And that actually, while I've looked into it, I don't really have a good scientific answer as to why that happens, other than the fact that it does.
Yeah. Finally, before we close off the open fermentation, I'll say that there's a whole other side to this topic that goes into wild ales and wild fermentations.
That's true.
And we won't talk about that because that involves some other techniques.
That goes down a rabbit hole for sure.
Yeah, it's definitely a fun topic, but we won't talk about it today. Let's go into, you want to talk about this before we talk about that?
Surely.
Cool. So getting the most out of your Kveik yeast. And I already saw earlier in the stream that we got a Norwegian.
Speaking of open fermentations.
Right.
Kveik would be another great one actually to do an open fermentation with.
Also, Kveik wouldn't be the worst idea in a tropical stout too, which is one of the very first comments we got. Thinking about doing a tropical stout with Hornadal Kveik.
Hey, there you go.
Pushes forward a lot of the same fruity notes that you want off your yeast, but in a much Kveiker way.
Oh God, this guy sometimes.
Right.
So anyway, flavor from Kveik. So we have had a lot of actually experience with using not necessarily the Hornadal, but the Voss strain from Imperial, which is their Loki, but also the blend as well. And really our experience is that this yeast has a huge variance of flavors, and it all depends on really how you're pitching it. Temperature is a huge impact, and then kind of the overall beer base and environment that you're giving it to work with.
Yeah, so if you haven't worked with Kveik very much, I'm sure a lot of you have, or at least have heard of it, because it's becoming very, very topical in the beer world. But if you haven't worked with it enough, the things that you need to know about Kveik is that it's designed to be a yeast that can ferment really, really quickly. I think that actually is part of the root of its name, why it's called Kveik. But for it to do that, it definitely needs some proper coddling. That's probably the best way to put it.
Yeah. So if you do want to ferment this strain on a low temperature, there's one thing to think about, and that is actually temperature is a big part of it. For one, low temperatures, what we've experienced is that it tends to throw a nice light tangerine-like ester profile from it.
That's the Voss specifically.
Yes, the Voss specifically. And then at higher temperatures, it can actually be clean, but have a hard time finishing out regardless. And so by higher temperatures, I mean, honestly, like 80, plus. 90 degrees. Yeah.
Our best ferments that we've gotten out of it, we actually have pushed it above 100, and part of that has to do with the health of your Kveik. So if it's your first pitch, I don't recommend doing that, or if you're not doing a starter, I usually try to air just a little bit under that, maybe like 90, 95. But second pitch, especially if you have too much, because you can't have too much, you definitely want to underpitch this yeast a little bit. Then the second pitch, you can definitely push that up to that 100 degrees and have it be plenty good.
Yeah. So speaking of underpitching, that is what we found is actually the best technique in combination with proper oxygenation and then a very, very healthy dose of yeast nutrient for this strain, and that's really what's going to push through those fruity, sometimes even funky flavors, especially more from the Hornadal strain than the Voss strain. And so that's sort of our best practices that we found. Ferment that hot so it finishes out, especially at those low temps. It doesn't like to finish out, so usually you got to heat it up. And then so another thing is that we've seen people do this a couple times, and that they use this strain and then they still sort of bitter a beer to almost a West Coast standard when they're brewing an IPA, and they might throw 50 IBUs, 80 IBUs of bittering hops at a beer like this. And really what that's going to do is it's going to blow out some of the more delicate flavors that this yeast strain will throw out.
This strain goes really well with hazies and a lot of those newer juicy IPAs, because the subtlety of the fruitiness that you're getting off the hops actually blends really well in some of the fruitiness of the Kveik yeast. That said, if you're, like Logan said, if you're kind of blowing it out, you're maybe just losing the losing the allure of brewing with that yeast.
Yeah, I mean, it's still going to work, but it gets to the point of like, why would you use that yeast in the first place if you're just going to cover it up?
2-day fermentation, that's probably a benefit.
Well, there's there is
on
that
the commercial
too.
scale.
Yeah, so it does tear through some beer if you keep it nice and warm.
Yeah.
But then again, pretty much any yeast strain will. So
yeah.
all right, what else we got?
So on Kveik, I don't know if we talked about nutrient, but especially when you're under pitching, which you should be under pitching with Kveik, doing a lot of nutrient, like more nutrient than you think, like 4 times more nutrient than you think you'd normally need in this strain is super, super important because it has to go through a lot of multiplications to rip through a beer.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, what are we dosing per barrel, which is 31.5 gallons? It's like several ounces, I think, of our nutrient that we're using.
Per barrel, I think it's probably like 8 ounces of nutrient. Mm-hmm. And also per barrel, a lot of times when we're doing this, when we're fermenting at that 100 degrees, we'll use 1 pack of Imperial's Loki for an entire barrel. So that's certainly an underpitch. But if you're keeping that warm and you're making sure that it's staying in fermentation, which sometimes we'll do on the second day of fermentation, so the day after we pitch it, what we'll do a lot of times is we'll open up the fermenter and throw some CO2 on the bottom to churn it up. At the same time that we'll do things like, if we're doing a brute, that's when we'll add enzyme to the beer. If we're doing a dry hop, that's when we'll dry hop too, because it's going to be done really, really fast. And so we want to make sure we get those dry hops in.
Yeah, get those biotransformation hops working for you.
Yeah. And then sometimes if you're worried, you can add more nutrient at this point too. I know a lot of bigger commercial scale breweries will add nutrient in stages like that too.
Yep. So then the last thing to talk about with getting the most out of your Kveik yeast is that you don't want to get overly complicated with your grain bill. And I think this falls along the same lines as what happens when you overbitter these beers. And that is, keep your grain bill simple. Don't start throwing lots of crystal malts at it. Probably don't want to throw a lot of dark malts at it because, again, that's just going to overwhelm the actual profile of the yeast itself, which is what you're really wanting to highlight. So keep it light, keep it simple. If you want to build up some body, throw some adjunct, flaked oats, flaked wheat, whatever you name it in there. But otherwise just find, a nice tasty base malt and really kind of let that work with the yeast strain itself.
That's it. I mean, I think you can use Kveik in like a tropical style. I think that's, you can definitely do darker beers, but if you're trying to get the flavor of the Kveik yeast to really shine on its own, then definitely keep it simple.
All right. Well, that's, I think, is a good breakdown of Kveik. Hopefully you guys got a little bit out of that. So let's go on to our last topic, which is blending beer. This has kind of inspired me from an article that I came across the other day, and I was like, oh, that's interesting because I've come across a lot of breweries, including ourselves, that love to blend beer right from the tap. But there's also breweries, I don't know if I should name drop, but sure, Crux is one that I've actually been to, and the head brewer refuses to blend any of their beers, which I thought was kind of weird. So there's 2 different takes on that, but I kind of use that as inspiration to go down and create a discussion about blending beer and really, should it be done? If it's done, when would you do it? And what are the best ways to blend 2 beers together?
So we got really quick before we go on. There's a little bit of an argument, I think, on whether or not you should underpitch with Kveik. There are 2 trains of thought. One is in general, don't ever underpitch because you want to get the most out of your yeast. With Kveik, it originally was an underpitched yeast because of how it was pitched. But I will say you can pitch normal amounts with Kveik and still get great flavors. That's fine. Temperature and nutrient are still important, so get that temperature high. If you underpitch, nutrient is extra, extra, extra important, and you can get a really great beer in a small amount of time with underpitching. So I don't know if that helps out with whatever's going on there.
I think regardless of your pitch rate, you need to make sure that you Garcock that one, though.
Garcock.
Yeah.
Garcock?
Garcock.
Kveik.
Okay. Anyway.
Blending beers. Blending beers on the commercial scale is a lot more common than you think. Anytime you've had a barrel-aged or a sour beer, it's most likely blended if it's good.
Yeah, so it's actually a much more common practice than most people realize, and it is a great way to either one, take beers that are out of balance and actually put them into a nice balance, which I think kind of mentioning the sours, a lot of times you'll have one sour that's super, super aggressive, old and kind of acidic, and then you'll have a younger sour that's really nice and fruity or floral, but doesn't quite have that acidic bite that you're looking for, and then the other way to blend beers is if you're actually trying to just take two beers that might be good on their own, but you're trying to get a little more complexity out of it. And I think a great example of that is something that we usually do right off of our tap, where a lot of times we'll have our Caster Muncher, which is actually the kit that we're shipping out to people now.
Coffee light beer, super
coffee light beer. And then we also have usually some kind of a stout, for instance, our Count Chocula Stout. And blending those tends to kind of reduce the sort of thickness and robust body of that stouts with the thinner beer that is the Kolsch, but also add those coffee characteristics to the roasted malts that are in the stout. And so both those beers together actually combine to make a more complex beer in the end.
Yeah, so it's a fun way to take two beers that are normally good and just make them better. Or a lot of times it comes down to the person who's drinking them. So we have plenty of people who don't necessarily like that particular combination, but like one beer over the other. In the same way, we have a lot of people that come in here that like sours-ish, or they're just getting into sours, but our sours might be a little bit more aggressive. And so we'll do the same kind of thing. We'll have a fantastic neutral beer like the blonde that we have on right now, and we'll have our sour. And we'll be like, hey, by the way, if you like that flavor but just don't want it as intense, we can go ahead and just cut it down with some blonde. And that is for some reason sort of taboo in the beer culture, but I mean it's historically appropriate when it comes to beer. If you look at like old world London,
Black and tan, anyone?
Yeah, it happens. But then let's talk about blending on the production side, blending going into kegs in the first place, because this is something that's again not thought of by the homebrewer as appropriate, but any homebrewer that's also a home winemaker probably knows that blending is something that you need to do. You make multiple wines. And every wine that you see in the bottle, even like a Cabernet, is usually a Cabernet with like 4% Syrah or something like that. It's very common in the alcohol world, but for whatever reason dropped off in the beer world because we all started chasing that crisp American lager.
Yeah, and I think the big guys actually still do it, especially the traditional German guys. There is a technique called Krausening, where you're actually taking some finished beer and putting that, mixing that in with your new wort, and that actually does. It not only keeps your yeast going and everything, but it really aids in consistency of the product from batch to batch, especially when you're working with ingredients that may or may not be very consistent.
Yeah. Yeah, in the big boy world, blending is kind of necessary to get the right whatever it's called.
Yeah, so there are a few things too before we talk about blending at home, of situations where blending is not appropriate, and that's something that we have seen too, even on the commercial side, and that's when you have an off flavor in your beer.
You can't blend away. You can't blend away the butter.
You can't blend away the butter. Yeah. So if you do have off flavors in your beer, definitely get that mindset out that, well, I can just blend it with a beer that has a really strong flavor to cover those off flavors up.
That's called cheating, and it's not okay.
And the reality is, more often than not, it's not going to work. You're still going to have those off flavors, and now you have twice as much beer that doesn't taste good. So if you do have off flavors, either get through it, drink the batch, give it away to your buddies that don't know any better, and or just
distill it.
Or that too. I mean, that's another option.
So let's talk about strategies for blending at home. On the commercial scale, what usually happens in, let's say, the sour world, actually probably most commonly in the sour world, but it also happens in the barrel world, is they'll actually have blending tanks. And so they'll take beers from, foeders or from barrels, and they'll blend it into, or they'll put them into blending tanks, which are basically tanks that are stacked in a quadrant that makes it really easy to say, I'm going to get this much of this beer and this much of this beer into the final product. So at home, the way to do that is to use corny kegs as your blending tanks.
So what you're going to have to do is you're going to have to take 2 kegs and jumper the 2 kegs into 1 keg. And first off, I guess what I should say is that generally you'll take those two beers, throw them on tap, and actually measure out very specific amounts of each beer to figure out what ratio you want to blend to. Sometimes this might be simple. It might just be a 1-to-1 ratio, but a lot of times it's not. A lot of times you're going to want to blend a little bit more of one beer than another beer. So what I recommend is trying to find some graduated measurement tool and actually mix those at a very specific amount into your pint glass until you get the flavor profile that you're looking for.
Micro pipette out.
And then what you'll do is you'll actually get some kind of a scale, and you'll take those kegs, and well, I guess you'll take the empty keg and you'll put it on a scale, and then you'll actually measure out by weight those ratios of beer going into the blend keg, and you'll do that by taking a liquid side to liquid side jumper, and then just opening up the relief valve on the keg that you're trying to blend into, and then obviously pushing that with CO2.
And in lieu of doing that, you can always do the good old-fashioned eyeball test. What that means is if your beer is nice and cold, as you're putting it into the new keg, sometimes you'll see a little condensation line creep up. And you can be like, that's about 2/3.
Yeah, there's wiggle room for most beers. Sours you might want to be a little bit more precise on, just because they can have some pretty strong flavor profiles to them. But yeah, with that said, I mean, when we're blending from the tap, for instance, like the Coffee Kolsch and the Count, we eyeball it for sure, and we'll adjust it for people, whether be it 1-2 or 1-1.
Yeah, depending on what flavors they want. So yeah, that's your blending strategy at the home scale. What else did we write down?
Somebody asked if we can blend margarine, by the way.
Blended margarine. Oh yeah, margarine is definitely better to blend than butter. I like to do margarine and peanut butter, just to kind of loosen up the peanut butter a little bit, and then that goes really good if you just blend it in with like a quarter cup of IPA or something like that. That's the morning breakfast protein smoothie.
You can blend that.
Put a bird on it.
All right, and I think that more or less sums up our topic. So we're going to open this up to general questions at this time. This one's going to be a little bit of a quicker one today.
Yeah, go ahead and give us your cue, and we'll give you the A.
That was weird.
What? It's question of the Q&A. We're Q&A. Okay, let's go.
Somebody's saying that blending beers just annoys Untapped users, which is okay. I honestly think we should annoy Untapped users.
Not to start anything, but we don't use Untapped on purpose.
Yeah, it's a pretty subjective forum.
It's
to
an
say
interesting
the
thing. I'm just overall, I'm not super happy with how with the contribution that Untapped makes to the craft beer community.
Yeah, definitely.
I think there's a lot of people that kind of fall into the same boat as us, where we just don't.
I can't tell you how many people I've seen actually leave reviews on beers, and it's not even the right beer.
Oh yeah, that happens all the time.
It's not even the right brewery sometimes. Yeah.
We just had your beer from Kansas City, and we're gonna rate it 5 stars. Well, thank you. It's not our beer. Our beer doesn't live in Kansas City, but cool.
Yeah, right.
All right. Speaking of bottling my raspberry ghost pepper kettle sour today, and it turned out exactly how I'd hoped. Love to send you one. Is there a disinfecting protocol nowadays? We'll just we'll wipe it down with some. That sounds really good. So yes, please send us that, and we will wipe it down with disinfectant wipes when it gets here.
Yes, maybe. I don't know. I'll just let Peter touch it, and then I'll wipe him down.
Yeah. Sounds good. Just throw me in one of those hot showers or whatever. Let's work up.
Spray you down with IO Star.
Love the flavors of West Coast IPAs, but sometimes have a bit of a burn. And I find that blending 50-50 with pale ale is a good experience. Cool. Yeah, and that's also a good way to add different flavors. Sometimes pale ales will come across with a little bit more like I don't know, sometimes like grassy or citrus flavors that IPAs don't have, or vice versa. IPAs a lot of times can have tons of like those fruity tropical hops, and so yeah, for sure.
Certainly so, yeah. Tell your local brewery to stop bittering their beer so much, too. It doesn't actually help anything.
You don't need the bitterness. I don't know. I've had some really good, like, hyper-aggressive beers, like, the ones that you calculate out at, like, 200 IBUs, but they're really probably only, like, 80. I accidentally made a tropical stout earlier, infused with Malibu coconut rum. Yum.
Okay.
We have done some stouts that we've infused with some coconut rum.
Yeah.
And that we actually have rum flavoring here that we've played around with.
Yeah, I'm curious to see how thick that beer was, though. That would be my only thing with the Malibu, is I know it's got a lot of that, like, it's probably got some glycerin or something in it to give you the mouthfeel.
And it needs pineapple juice.
Pineapple juice.
Pineapple juice and Malibu.
Pineapple juice would actually be a fantastic thing to add to a tropical stout, actually.
And a brute IPA.
That would give you a little bit of that acidity, a little bit of that fruitiness, and also dry that out. So if you're thinking about a sugar adjunct to add, maybe think about throwing a couple cans of pineapple juice at it.
I like the pineapple juice and a brute IPA idea just because it gives you head tension, actually. Oh. It's What would you substitute lactose with to make a stout creamy? Someone said oats. Oats sounds pretty good.
Yeah.
I'm getting way up there. Let's go back down to the more recent ones.
Yeah, no worries. Yeah, I can. I got one. So somebody's asking generally what happens when you overpitch Kveik, and really when you overpitch it, it's not gonna necessarily hurt anything, but you're just getting less overall character from that yeast strain.
Yep.
Generally, what happens is as you're fermenting any beer, for that matter. As those yeasts divide, that's actually has to do a lot when you're getting some of your flavor components. The more divisions you get from a yeast, the more flavor you're getting from that yeast. So that's a lot of times why people also recommend when you're doing a true lager, for instance, that you're actually upping your pitch rates because you want to keep any kind of flavor profile you might get down to an absolute minimum. So the Kveik is going to be the opposite. If you overpitch, it just means you're going to end up with a super clean beer.
But still add a lot of nutrients.
But still add nutrients, yeah. It just, especially the Voss strain, it just doesn't like to finish off those last 5 points. So sometimes you got to nudge it along.
Nudge. If you got the nutrients in there and you've got the heat, though, it'll do really good. What in the world am I drinking? I'm drinking electrolyte water. A lot of it.
It's my urine triple filtered. It's got electrolytes.
Yeah, it takes a triple filter to get to plutonium green.
Someone's asking if we have a new camera or lens.
Is that a good thing? That's a good thing, right?
I don't know. Yeah.
We played with the lighting to make it look more epic in here today. So we've got a nice harsh-ish light coming on this side, and so we've got some shadows on this side.
It's actually really dark in here. My face is kind of blown out too, so.
Your face is I look really sexy though.
Yeah,
so.
Thanks for that one.
That's what matters. You let us know. How do you like the overall aesthetic of this? Do you like it better when we're super, super lighted, or do you like this more aggressive, balanced?
So somebody's we're all on the Kveik train now. So the Kveik is how I like to say that. And they're asking if it'd be good for a New England. I mean, that's more or less the spinoff that people are doing is they're doing New England. They're doing.
I see it in New England more than anything else.
Yeah, they're basically doing hazies. You're substituting, your London Ale 3 or your juice strains for this Kveik, and you're just kind of accentuating that really, really citrus fruit profile to it. Some of the best ones I've had, honestly, have been with a little bit different hop profiles too. I actually find that this is hops like New Zealand hops, like Motueka, Wakatu, and there's another one I can't quite remember. That's a New Zealand hop. Go really, really well with these strains. There's something about the esters that the yeast itself throws, and then the profiles that the hops have that just go fantastic for a nice light hazy.
Yeah. Honestly, just pretty much any way you do a New Zealand IPA or a New England IPA, it's going to taste really, really good.
It's hard to go wrong with that. If you got, your whatever recipe you got for a hazy, then
the nice thing in
throw that with some.
The other reason that Kveik is a really good strain for these New England or these super juicy hoppy style beers is because it is a style that you get completed and into packaging within 3 or 4 days. Yeah. This thing if you ferment properly, Kveik will get the job done very fast, which means that the hop flavors that you're getting off of even the Whirlpool, the dry hop flavors, they are super, super fresh. The downside is being a warmer fermentation and an aggressive fermentation, you do risk volatilizing some hops, but
that's true.
I think it's a trade-off because you also get extra fruitiness off the yeast, and so it just seems to go pretty well.
Now I'm almost wondering, hey, here's a question for your viewers out there. Has anybody actually pitched either some Brett Lambicus or some Brett Brux towards the end of a Kveik fermentation and then let that go? That's something I kind of want to play with now that, if we want to go on the opposite end, instead of a quick turnover, do a 6-month turnover, let that Brett have its way with it and then dry hop it right before you keg it.
That's the way to do it.
I feel like you might be able to get some really interesting flavors from something like that.
If you had the Brett towards the end too, I'd still keep that fermentation warm because that's Brett Brux specifically on the warm fermentation gets some really, really nice wild ale kind of flavors, some nice barnyard flavors.
Bam.
Kveik is an old Norwegian word for yeast. I knew that. I just didn't think about it when I said it. I promise. Would you recommend for an imperial? I would highly recommend oxygenating. Yes. There's a whole thread that I missed. Someone actually mentioned that they use DRC, so that's cool. We started carrying DRC not too long ago and actually haven't had a lot of chance to use it ourselves, but it sounds like it's going to be super good. Sweet Spanish wine notes. Hey, perfect. That must have been when we were talking about like vinous qualities.
Yeah. All right. Well, let us know if you have any more questions. We will try to answer a few more before we wrap up this live session.
I find the Kveik strains are much more attenuative than the English yeast substitutes for a NEPA. Wouldn't the Kveik change the mouthfeel of a NEPA? So overall, NEPAs can finish a little bit on the drier side. And yes, we have had that a lot of those Kveiks will finish drier. That said, depending on what you have in your mash, you can end up with a more mouthfeely kind of mash anyways. So
yeah, I think that depends a lot on your mash. Ours actually tend to finish on the dry side regardless, and I think that just has to do a lot with the fact that we found that Bessmall's Heidelberg is a great one to use for those really light beers, and it has a really high enzyme content to it. So we just get crazy conversions regardless. I mean, we're talking about beers that, be it Kveik, be it our London Ale 3 strain from Y yeasts that are going from 1060 down to like 09, 1010, somewhere in there. So
yeah, and going down to 1008, I mean, you can still, depending on the precursors that are in there and what you have in there from your mash, even a 1008 beer can feel nice and mouthfeely.
That is a good point, actually, yes. So the mouthfeel is not necessarily just from the final gravity of beer. A lot of it has to do with those, in this case, the beta-glucans from all of your flake stuffs.
Yeah.
Don't go through a beta-glucan SRS. Don't do that. That'd be a bad idea for a hazy. In fact, it might make it clear. Whoops, made it clear hazy.
Hey,
sorry, not sorry.
Then it's a juicy. Norwegian home brewer, big on Kveik brew, sitting here laughing, listening to Americans talk about Kveik. Nice.
Bam.
It's always fun to see the people from other spots of the world that have obviously.
Somebody's asking about whether or not it'll heat itself up, and that all depends on obviously
the size of the beer.
Yeah, the volume. On a 5-gallon batch, you're probably going to have to throw a heater on it in a big old 5-barrel insulated fermenter. Definitely.
Yeah, we can probably get just with a proper pitch. If we're doing a 5-barrel, we could probably get that thing to rise 10 plus degrees pretty easily. That said, we still take care of making sure that it's going to be popped up temperature-wise. What we'll do is we'll actually throw a water heater and pump on it and run that through the jacket.
Bam. Thoughts on steeping flaked oats, flaked wheat,
or protein grains for mouthfeel, and an extract recipe? Yes, but you also got to take into account protein solubility. There's a couple things that happen that makes proteins more or less soluble. Honestly, you can get a great blend if you do a blend of a protease rest and a steep, but that's obviously something you don't do in a homebrew recipe. What I might recommend is if you want to make sure that you're getting a lot off of that, actually slightly toasting those first might give more. Other than that, you'll get a lot of proteins that'll drop out during fermentation.
Yeah. Otherwise, I mean, if you're steeping them without any kind of enzymatic grains, you'll get some flavor. You're just not going to get as much extract as you would in a typical mash, I guess is the best way to say that. You do get some gelatinization from the flaking process. But yeah, I would just say if you're wanting to do it, throw in a pound of some kind of a pale base malt with them just to hopefully get a little bit of conversion, and then maybe actually leave those guys in your water for a little bit longer when you're steeping them too, just to try to get as much of those proteins, much of those beta-glucans in solution.
Being an extract beer, though, you'll naturally have a lower fermentability than doing an all-grain batch anyway, so you should end up with some thickness regardless.
Yep.
Thinking of a barley wine, starting with Imperial L17 lager yeast at 55 degrees and then adding another yeast after a few weeks. Ideas on what to add after the L17. The temperature is going to be about 65. So a really aggressive strain that you're going to want to add is going to be something like the Pac-Man yeast, Rogue's yeast. You could try White Labs has a super high gravity yeast, but that one can get pretty, pretty alcohol boozy flavored. So it's not a super tasty yeast.
So to finish up, though, I can see it working.
Yeah.
Generally, just whatever beastly neutral ale strain you can get your hands on. That's going to be the best for you.
Do either of us have any formal brewing education, or did we just do our own research? A lot of it comes from doing our own research. Our education is both in the biological world. So I went to college for biochemistry. He went to college for biology. I think that gives us a small leg up when it comes to learning this stuff and knowing how to weed out bad information. But that said, and we have had wrong information like over the course of the several years we've been doing this, and it just comes from I've been in this business for 8 years now, and I also network with a lot of brewers, some of whom have formal education, who've done the UC Davis program, who've done the Sable program. Some, we have some local colleges now that have brewing programs, and so networking is probably the biggest source of information we have. Just talking to a lot of other brewers that are super smart, and then also a lot of trial and error ourselves.
Not to mention helping lots and lots of other small breweries in the area get up and running.
Yep.
Really, I think it's a lot of it has to do with experience too. That's
We're active learners, and we use that to our advantage.
Yep, because there's techniques that sort of come and go when basically when the hard data finally comes in, because there's a lot of hearsay in the beer world. There's a lot of things that people think are important. There's a lot of things that people think aren't important, and until you really play with it, until either you experiment with it as a brewer, or you start finding actual like hard studies that are coming out on it, it's really hard to say what kind of impact a lot of these things have. So a lot of what we kind of tell you comes from our own experience with things.
And we try to forward that same philosophy to you. Like there's a lot of things that we don't think that you can learn just from a book or just from us telling it to you. A lot of it, you'd have to kind of pick out your own experience. That could be based on your system, could be based on the ingredients you have available to you. But just brewing a lot is probably the best way to find out what tastes good and how you can consistently make good beer.
Yeah, and it's naturally a very hard thing to study just because of all the variabilities. It's really hard to say that one variable was the cause of this thing when you have literally 100 other variables that went into that same batch of beer. And that's, I think, the big thing. With that said,
that's why I also take anything everybody else says with a grain of salt. Like even if I get an experience from another brewer, even if they're a very, very good brewer, and they say, hey, by the way, I did this and it led to this flavor, my first thought is how did that work and why did that work? And then I always kind of take it with a grain of salt, like, okay, maybe it was that, maybe it's not. I'm gonna have to try it for myself and figure it out. I trust a lot of the brewers that we talk to, but at the same time, you've got to be a little bit guarded with taking information, because there's a lot of times you'll hear something and it's like, that doesn't sound 100% right. And so you kind of keep that in the back of your mind, and the next time you get a chance to actually experiment with it, then you can either disprove or cement that as a positive idea in your head.
Somebody's saying they want to study microbiology so they can understand yeast better. That is pretty cool. I would also really look into the chemistry side of things, coming from a guy that has a biology degree, just because I think my degree really helps me.
Well, micro is a lot of chemistry.
Yeah, somewhat so.
No, it's organic chemistry.
Yeah. Why it helps me understand, I think, all of the microbial world, especially when it comes to cleanliness and sanitation. I feel like I see things a little differently than a lot of people do. Chemistry will help you overall with the processes that go down in beer, because it has a lot more to do with just yeast.
That said, there is a free online course through Harvard. Harvard actually publishes a lot of their courses online that you can just go ahead and take for free at your own pace. And Harvard has a microbiology course. So
there you go. Nice.
Take it. It's a full course, so expect to be spending hours and hours of your time taking it as if you were in actual school. But it is super cool that all that information is out there for free.
Lots of it nowadays. Okay, well, we good? We got to open up here.
Looking at bottle
we got one more.
Conditioning with Brett. Any suggestions or tips? Just kicked a Belgian ale. Looking at bottling some and conditioning with Brett. So
let it sit in the bottle for 2 years and then give it to somebody you really don't like.
Yeah, just make sure that you add a ton of bottling and priming sugar and the Brett. No, basically the biggest thing with that is just make sure that you know the gravity going into the bottle, so you can calculate how many volumes of CO2, and adjust back with any sort of priming sugar. If it's above 1.006, I think you probably don't need any priming sugar at all. So you just got to purge the bottles with argon or nitrogen or CO2 if that's all you got, to make sure that there's no oxygen in there. But the Brett will slowly but surely chew through all those residual sugars sugars, and then you'll end up with a nice dry beer in a couple years.
Yeah. Brett, don't worry too much about bottle bombs, actually, unless you're doing that super, super long aging. While, yes, it does keep breaking down sugars in there and keep fermenting them, it does it at a really, really slow rate. So, honestly, even like 4 or 5 months, you probably won't notice, any kind of bottle bomb. It's not until you probably hit that year mark that things start getting real fizzy on you.
When using a spunning valve, you're welcome, Jake. When using a spunning valve, is it better to carbonate with the final points of gravity during primary fermentation, or better to add priming sugar? Carbonate with the final points of gravity. So take gravity samples as you're doing it. If you have a sample port, that's the easiest way to do it. If it involves you having to open up a carboy and dig in there, then I would just go ahead and use priming sugar. But on the commercial world, what we do is we take the gravity as it's going down and we calculate back from it's what we expect its final gravity to be to spun and get that level of carbonation. That also saves a lot in terms of for us CO2 that we don't have to buy. So that's the general thing to do with spunning.
Yeah. Otherwise, just eyeballing it can help. It might not get you fully carbonated, but it should get you a better part of the way there. And so if you're eyeballing your fermentation, you see your bubbler or whatever, that Krausen dropping and that bubbler significantly slowing down, that is probably a good point to say, yeah, we could probably put a spunning valve on now, because usually that's a sign that you're, that 80-ish, 85% to your final gravity. So
Did you just call an airlock a bubbler?
yeah,
Cool.
I did.
Just checking.
Hey, that's what people use.
So one more that I see. Do we have an email to ask questions to? Honestly, the best thing is Facebook or Instagram. Our email is flooded with thousands of emails, like a lot of emails that I will never see because
Things get lost very easily in there.
But if you use Facebook or Instagram, you can go ahead and send us messages on Facebook or Instagram. Also, you can comment on the bottom of YouTube videos. I try to get to a lot of those, but there's also a lot of YouTube comments, so again, those can get lost. But yeah, if you send us a message on Facebook or Instagram, that's probably the best way to ask questions. Did a brute finished at 1.009, used amylase enzyme in the fermenter. 1.009 is going to be high
lower
for a brute. So I would say strategies for using enzyme, you definitely want to pitch it at high Krausen. I pitch it when, that's usually when I add my dry hops too. But if you're using the right enzyme and you're keeping it warm and your yeast aren't dying or settling out, so maybe just look into yeast choice too. But then it should finish close to 1 if you're using AMG.
Yeah, it might take a little bit of time too. We prefer to use a real small amount, which means that you have to let it go for another week or even 2 weeks after hitting it with the enzyme in order to get down to that proper finished gravity, which actually should be more or less 1.0. So
yeah, well, actually with the low cal that we did, I mean that's a low starting gravity, so I guess that's something else to look into. Yeah. The low cal that we did started at 1030 or 1032, something like that. The day after pitch, because we used the Kveik strain on that, the Voss Kveik strain, we're fermenting it hot. The day after pitch, it was down at 1.011 and was definitely looking like it was slowing down quite a bit. And that's when I dry hopped and added enzyme. And the next day, it was down at 1.000. So
yep. So we even had them finish sub, because if there's no sugars left, then you end up with like 998s, stuff like that. So if it's at 09, I would probably have let that go a little bit longer.
Yeah. Also says he did the enzyme at the start of fermentation. So next time, just doing it when the yeast is super active seems to help quite a bit, because also the yeast is churning up the enzyme and everything like that. So it seems to work pretty well.
It goes, so the enzyme is designed to work at those higher temperatures. So it actually works really slowly at fermentation temperatures. And that's a big part of things. Mm-hmm. Which you can always, I guess, add a bunch, which makes it go faster. But then we've noticed it has this weird sort of meaty flavor associated with it.
Proteiny.
A little bit goes a long ways.
All right. I think that's all the questions that I can see. Sorry if we missed something.
Go ahead and post that in the comments below, and we will wrap up this session. Thank you all for watching. If you like these live streams, don't forget to check out our other videos on the channel. Like, subscribe.
Tune in every Sunday at 8:45 Pacific Standard Time.
Yeah. Also hit the little bell down below this video. That's actually going to send you a reminder on YouTube.
When we're going live. Because sometimes we've been doing it at irregular times just because.
Yep. So it'll let you know if we have new videos. It'll let you know when we're going live. So definitely click the bell button, and we will see you next time.
Cheers.
Oh, I'm out of tea. Where'd I put my cup?
You want some electrolyte?
No, not really. That's kind of gross. Okay.
And live stream. Oh, I'm so sore.
I know. That was a long night last night.